Enjoy the taste of summer no matter what the weather when you head to Maverick for some Mountain Dew Baja Blast. You'll love the legendary, refreshing tropical lime flavor. And to make the sweetness last longer, Maverick now has it in 1-liter bottles. For a limited time, get 2 for $5. Single purchase regular price. Plus, Adventure Club members get 25 bonus trail points with purchase. So blast into Maverick today and enjoy that unmistakable Baja flavor. Maverick, adventure's first stop.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
50. That's right, 50. This is our 50th episode, and you'd really know it if you could see the smile on my face right now. We measure things in numbers, but these days I'm also measuring in experiences, and what an experience this podcast has been for me. The guests have been so kind, they've been entertaining, and so informative, they've just made this experience really, really unforgettable. Today's guest is no exception. Bruce Elfstom of the Mongolian Bankhar Dog Project joins me. Mongolian Bankhar Dogs. Have you ever even heard of them? Well, from the days of Genghis Khan, yep, that guy, Marco Polo, yep, that guy too, all the way up until today, the Bankhar has this incredible history. Now, what do you think about when you hear Mongolia? Think cold weather, Mongols, Gobi Desert? Well, these landrace livestock herding dogs, they really play a big part in all of that. Years ago, the nomads would move their herds from one place to another with the Bankhar dog protecting them from the predators, like snow leopards, wolves, bears, foxes, eagles, a bunch of things. Now, as modern times came, and due to many other circumstances, the herders began just to hunt it themselves and kill them, basically eliminating all the predators by no longer using the dogs. Now, this has caused many of the predators to be endangered and also the desertification of the land. Now, Bruce's story of bringing back the Bankhar dog and reintroducing the old ways is fascinating. The results speak for themselves. I can't emphasize enough how interesting this episode is. This Bankhar dog, they're just gorgeous dogs, and it's one story that everyone will love. So I'm going to tell you my Marco, but I'm going to save your Polo to the end of the whole episode.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and games, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today, I have a really great guest. His name is Bruce Elfstrom. He is a professional biologist. He's done all kinds of things, but we're here today to talk specifically about the Mongolian. Sorry, guys, I've got COVID, so my brain is not working well. Mongolian Bankhar Dog Project. He's the founder of it and getting ready to go on a big trip, so we're lucky to have him on. Bruce, thanks so much for being on, and I apologize for my dogs in the background.
No problem. Barking dogs is something I'm very familiar with.
Yes. So, what I thought we would do, again, when I was reading about your project, I didn't know anything about these dogs, and they're beautiful, first off, but secondly, your whole project there. But before we go there, let's go in your background, how you got where you are with this project. I saw your TED Talk, it's about 10 years ago, but let's get up to there and then move forward from there, if that's okay with you.
Sure. In terms of my background, I grew up in the Middle East after having been born in the States. And in the Middle East, I was often in the field and have always been an animal lover. And I entered college as an astrophysics major and then turned into a biology major. Worked as a teacher for a while, and then I started an independent business, basically training people to be prepared for field work, and that led to all kinds of opportunities. I grew up with a mother who worked for the UN and was a journalist. She was Swedish. And I was, of course, a dual citizen at that time. My father was a documentary filmmaker. So amongst, having lived and traveled around in the Middle East for a long time and having parents like that, we were always in some corner of the world, conflict zone or what have you. So I was very good at being in the field. That allowed me to start a business that then, allowed me to not only encounter interesting people, but take on interesting projects. One of these projects, I was hired as a line producer, which is basically, everybody calls a line producer the cat herder. So you're herding all the cats of a film crew. In other words, you need to find where you're going, what you're doing in the field, who you're operating with. Basically, you're a fixer. So I was hired by a line producer to do an IMAX film in Mongolia on dinosaurs, in particular, in a way, following the route of Roy Chapman Andrews, who worked for the Museum of Natural History in the 20s and 30s, and was the fellow who found the first dinosaur eggs. So we went to Mongolia to do this film. It was a major expedition, which is why I was hired. We had, 70 something people and, thousands and tens of thousands of pounds of equipment. And we were there for quite some time. So it was a great classic adventure. And I'm telling this long, breathy story because what happened one evening on that trip, and I touch on this on the TED Talk that I did, is that we were in a community valley in Mongolia. And in a valley, it's often just extended families that have small gers, which are what some people call yurts, where they're living in and around an area and holding livestock. Well, one evening while we were there was a huge ruckus, and something was clearly going on outside, and we were hearing wolves and dogs barking, and this started at about 2 a.m, went on for hours, and everybody's up and not really being able to see what's going on. Come morning, what we find is that 17 young horses had been killed by a large pack of wolves, and that really was a stunner because clearly, aside from the sheep that were also killed that night, it was a huge impact to this extended family. As a biologist, I was working years before getting my graduate degrees in New Mexico. I had come across, just doing field work, a huge white dog, and it was guarding a flock of sheep and cow in southern New Mexico. It got me to wonder what was going on, and I found out that it was an experimental station that was using these large dogs to protect sheep and cow from predators, in particular coyotes. And when I looked into that, of course, you see the tradition of this being used in particular in Asia Minor, and some of Europe, for as far as anybody knows, or, it's certainly back thousands of years. And they had used these dogs in New Mexico called Akbash, and I had some experience and worked with them a little bit. So when we were in Mongolia, I asked the locals if they had, which I knew they had in the past, a large dog that helped them to protect their livestock. And their response was pretty simple. We used to, my grandfather had them. If we had them, none of this would happen, etc. But the dogs now are very hard to find. And during the socialist period where Mongolia arguably had kind of a puppet government under the Soviet Union, those dogs were asked, quote unquote, asked to not be kept. In other words, during that period, those dogs were often shot, left behind, and for a short period of time, they actually became fashionable skins for coats in Moscow. So the dog had been effectively wiped out for your average person. And that got me thinking, of course, that, well, what a shame. They have the tradition, they have the know-how. They clearly now need this dog. By the way, this film was in the early 2000s, to give you an idea that it had been at least 15 years since the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right.
So I got really thinking on this and asking, the herders more explicitly, what do you do now when you have predators like this? And basically what they do is what they were doing the morning we woke up after this pack had been through the valley, is that they go out and they find, or they already know often, where the wolf dens are. They pour gasoline in them, they light them on fire, and they go through a very extended hunt of retribution killing of the wolves. And that's a traditional thing that's been going on since, the dog became rare. Retribution killings are very, very common everywhere. You have depredation of livestock in any kind of culture. So clearly I was thinking, as a biologist and pretty much a nerd, I'm like, well, that's a shame, and there should be a solution, because they're doing it not only for wolf depredation, but snow leopard, et cetera, et cetera. So retribution killing is the number one thing that we're trying to alleviate with the use of livestock guardian dogs anywhere in the world. Well, that basically got me going. After the Mongolian project was over, I was chewing on this idea, and I basically just said to myself that I am going to see if I can find out if the dog that's in Mongolia, I didn't even know the name of it at that point really, is still in existence. And if not, I can bring a different kind of dog in, and I'm going to raise the dogs, teach the herders how to use them, train the dogs, give them back to the herders, so that the herders had a dog to protect the livestock. The presence of the dog, if it's effective as a working dog, is a very, very tight solution to a huge problem widespread through Central Asia, basically China all the way through to Portugal in a belt of sorts. And not to say that it's also not a problem in North America. But basically, the livestock guardian dog, in a passive way, keeps the predators off the livestock and then reduces the chances of loss to predators, which then alleviates the need of whoever the farmer is or the herder is to actually go through a retribution killing. Because first off, no farmer has time to do it if they don't need to do it. They don't really want to do it. They are often the first stewards of their environment. So the dog, on a very simplistic level, just its presence has a cascade effect of positive attributes for the ecosystem. That was the theory of what I did. I had my business where I was training people for expeditions, mostly for the use of vehicle-dependent expeditions. My primary client was military special forces and had been and has been for 30 years now. But I sent two of my younger employees cold to Mongolia to start this project in the early teens, 2000 teens, and just went with it. And that was now 15 or so years ago, and this is where we are. So that's the long, breathy background on this scenario.
Well, for the people listening, you've got a TED Talk out there that is really fascinating. It'll give you a basis of where you were 10 years ago. One of the things that I read, and correct me where I'm wrong, is not only are they going after the wolves, but it's also snow leopards and eagles and bears. And instead of using a traditional form of dogs, they're actually either baiting them, shooting them, trapping them and getting rid of them. And then you come in there and they're where we are, 10 years or 15 years ago.
That's right. I mean, any herder farmer, it's nice for us all to sit here in our couches and comfort and poo-poo people that kill snow leopards. But if you think long enough on it, you'll realize that these are people that are living, subsistence life. They're trying to raise children. There is no network in a poor country like Mongolia to help anybody out. When you start to lose livestock, you're losing your family's ability to live. So we have to be careful when we say, oh, it's terrible that somebody would kill a snow leopard. I think that we all deep down know that there is no choice, and we can't blame those people whatsoever. The trick is, how do we help them not do it?
Right.
And that's really where this livestock guardian dog comes in. And of course, the plus, especially in my case for Mongolia, is that the tradition of the use of livestock guardian dogs, in particular their dog they call Bankhar, which is flat face, is almost legendary in its value. So I had no convincing of the local people to get in the way of the progress of this project. I didn't have to convince government officials about the value of this. I didn't need to have any of that. My only impediment was, is this dog anywhere around now still so that we can breed them and use them and basically allow the Mongolians to use their old traditional Mongolian techniques to solve a current Mongolian problem. In other words, keeping it within the realm of their own culture, then allow their own pride to help us keep or start the momentum needed to basically get these dogs back into the hands of the people that have been wishing to have them for generations now. So that's not always the case with livestock guardian dog use. There are places that are using them very effectively now, but they've gone into areas where traditionally the dogs were not used. In particular, there's the use of livestock guardian dogs to protect cheetahs from retribution killing in Namibia. A very good example of a brilliant group that we know each other and are doing something quite similar. But they had the uphill battle of having to convince a people that hadn't used this kind of dog, and they needed to bring in a dog that was foreign to that area, which is a much more difficult situation than what I had. I basically was saving a national treasure, getting it back into the eye of the culture. And really what I did after that was develop a protocol that people could use to raise these dogs properly, and more importantly, to teach themselves or other herders how to use the dogs. Dogs know what they're doing. It's the people that don't know what they're doing. So most of what we've done is not so much breeding the dog and bringing it back. Yes, we did find it. We actually got many dogs from a concerned Mongolian citizen who had been collecting them because he had seen that they were disappearing. So on many levels, I found a like-minded person there, and he gifted us many beautiful dogs that started this process. And of course, we found many others in isolated mountain areas that hadn't been, touched by the socialist regime. To clarify why that socialist regime was detrimental to the dogs, when the Soviet Union's influence on Mongolia was at its height, nomads were really told, persuaded, or some people could argue, made to move into settled areas and become farmers, which they are not traditionally whatsoever. So this relocation of people changed the entire ethos of the country, and the dog represented the exact opposite of a settled farming life. They're nomadic. They have huge ranges. They can't be living in towns or settled areas because they fight each other. These are not, dogs that you would want to walk up to. They don't treat the other dogs that way. They don't treat strangers as friends right away. This is a major tool or weapon. And during this relocation, the dog had no way of being an effective tool. So even if they weren't shot or used for coats or what have you, which may or may not be true, the tradition story is that yes, they were definitely shot and used as coats, but even if they were not, they just could not fit into this new picture, this puzzle. We went out to find them and give them to herders, because herders have no money, and basically to reestablish an old tradition and make sure that the knowledge that the herders used to have, or their grandfathers had, was given back to them, because it was 2 or 3 generations of lost information for many Mongolian nomads. When they became nomads again after 1990, they didn't necessarily have all the information their grandfathers had, because their grandfathers never really put anything down on paper for sure, nor did they have a chance to train their great grandchildren. So really, our main thing was not breeding the dogs, but teaching the nomads, this is how they're used. This is the best way to do it. And, we can talk about exactly the mechanics of how they are used and how we train herders to train their dogs to be used in a bit. But that is the shell of what's happening. And my goal was not so much to save a dog breed, which, by the way, this is not a dog breed. This is what you call a landrace, and that's really a very, very different things than a dog breed. And again, we can get into that when we talk about genetics if we have time.
Right.
But we basically could have used any dog, but we ended up using that particular dog. So we basically are now in a situation where we've studied this and we know where we are going and where we need to, move to.
What I read, and again, what you read and what's true is often not the same, but the Bankhar is the only true dog from Mongolia. Well, really, it's from Buryat or someplace like that, and then came to Mongolia.
Okay, so those two things really aren't true.
Okay.
There are other dogs traditionally used in Mongolia. Basically, there are more than 3, but the 3 main are the Laika, which is like a Spitz dog that you see in Russia. It's a hunting dog for the boreal or the forest area. Then there is a sight hound, like a greyhound type of dog, another hunting dog that is more common in eastern Mongolia, but that's another dog breed. And then there is the Bankhar. On many levels, the Bankhar is not a breed like the Laika or the sight hound is. On many levels, the Bankhar is just the dog that lived in Mongolia. And Marco Polo even wrote about these dogs the size of donkeys. They are basically a village dog,
Okay.
right? Like you'd see in any place, a street dog. It's just that happens to be the street dog is a huge livestock guardian dog. And because that was the type of dog that when they were breeding amongst themselves, they stayed with that kind of look. And anything in Mongolia needs a job or it's of no value. So the dog co-evolved with people and had that job. If it didn't fill that, job, it would not have made it. So you have a population of dogs that all look the same, that are allowed to live only if they do the job they need to, and they need to survive in Mongolia. And many of your listeners may not understand that Mongolia is one of the coldest places in the world. It's a grassland with a huge desert in the south and some boreal forest, the taiga forest up in the north. But there's a saying in Mongolia, if you go north to Siberia, it gets warmer. And it does, because Mongolia is on a plateau. In Siberia, you go down in altitude. The average temperature in Ulaanbaatar is 29 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's not uncommon to have 110 degrees in the summer. So it's very common to be under 30 below zero in Ulaanbaatar for weeks or months. This dog that's roaming around, trying to make a living, working with humans so that it can get some food, and if it doesn't work right, it doesn't get food and dies, is under huge selective pressure. The selective pressure is primarily natural selection. In other words, it has to be of a certain size to keep a certain kind of mass to hold heat. It has to have a certain kind of fur, and it has to have ears that are this way and feet that are that way. That, alongside with the role that it must play in order to get fed, made this land race. And that's what a land race is not a breed. Mongolians don't breed until recently, Bankhar together for looks or size or anything like that. There are very, very few attributes that the Mongolians have that they would like to have in the next generation of a Bankhar. And I don't know if we have that much time to go into it, but what this does is form this kind of co-worker, the dog, and that is the left hand or right hand of the human herder. And the human herder is the dog's left or right hand. So they go together. They are artifacts of their environment and somewhat artifacts of each other's cultures. A breed, on the other hand, as you may have maybe said in some of your other podcasts, is really primarily modern-wise, bred for its looks to a standard and this and that. Bankhar is not like that at all. And genetically, to answer your question, where did the Bankhar come from? They did not come from up in the Barat area, which is on the Siberian border. They came from basically the shepherd dogs doing the same thing in northern Nepal all the way up into Kazakhstan. In other words, all those dogs there are land races as well.
Sure.
And this is just a derivative of a massive land race that, in my opinion, in ancient times, had a similar range to the east-west range of the Silk Road. In other words, the people that lived in the Asian steppes all the way through to Eastern Europe had these dogs. The gene pool of a dog in Hungary is connected to the gene pool of the dog in Mongolia. Obviously, the farther away you get, the less stable that connection, the less strong that connection is. But there is gene flow throughout the whole thing, just like, black bears in North America. As long as they can contact each other, there's gene flow throughout it.
So one of the things I read is these dogs are really loyal. I was sitting here thinking when you were talking. So they're loyal to the family, but if I show up, they're not going to like me at all. But is that the same thing with God, my voice is so bad. Is that the same thing with the herds they're protecting? They grew up with them, so they say, these aren't bad. These are part of my family, but if you're a predator, I'm going to go after you. Or do they train them?
They don't train them per se.
Okay.
They traditionally, anybody that uses livestock guardian dogs has a certain way of raising them, and it is just like how you would raise your goats. They're raised in a particular way. These dogs are raised in a particular way. What makes a livestock guardian dog is what I touched on earlier, is 10,000 years of coevolution with people.
Uh-huh.
It is the very fact that if you have a puppy that's over-aggressive to people or mean, that puppy is killed or not fed, which is basically the same thing.
Oh.
If you have a puppy that is not able to stay warm or is not able to stand up to a wolf or etc., they are selected against because they're just not allowed to live, either inadvertently or directly.
Right.
So, what comes out of this process is it's very harsh. The environment is killing them very quickly, right? It can, I spent, 4 weeks with an average of 52 below zero in Mongolia a few years ago, and things die very quickly that way. So the result of this is all livestock guardian dogs, until recent times when they become inbred, as the pet trade kind of gets a hold of them, are an artifact of a dog that needs to work within your means. And that is really choosing for dogs that have a very high nurturing aspect. In other words, the motherly aspect is the number one aspect of a livestock guardian dog. And that is different than the protective aspect. Mother aspect is, yes, they're protective, but they're protective of the pack or the herd around them and the people around them. And they are very nurturing. So they don't just protect and be aggressive like a guard dog would. They are protecting just like a mother would protect their child. You are angry when somebody's after it, and then you're very caring for the child after that conflict is done. So nurturing ability is huge in these dogs. In order to have nurturing ability, you have to have as little hunting instinct as possible. So the hunting aspect of a livestock guardian dog naturally over time has been selected away from. You don't want a dog that has a hunting aspect because that conflicts with the nurturing aspect of things, because they're basically nurturing a prey species, right? So you can't have a hunting dog and expect it to not hunt your goat and sheep.
Right.
So that's been selected from away. Now, again, selected is not people going, oh, that dog is this way or that dog is that way. It's nature saying it. It's the people just saying, I'm not going to feed that thing, or I'm going to kill it now. And it's also, which dogs just made it enough to have babies. Remember, evolution is all comes down to one thing, having babies. Whoever has the babies wins, right? So the dog that's aggressive is not getting fed, is not at its height of its health, is not going to be able to mate with that female, because that female is rather going to mate with a big, strong one who has nurturing, low hunting ability or drive. And therefore, you have really this kind of, I would say, microcosm evolution of these dogs with the human culture and the humans with the dogs that produce a dog that has low hunt drive, high nurturing ability. In Mongolia, a very big size, an incredibly heavy coat, small, tight feet so they don't get frostbite, hair on the bottom of the feet in the winter. The belly is totally covered with hair versus many other dogs. Very small ears, small eyes, and a short nose, all to keep the package tight and in a point that's easy to keep warm. At the same time, it can be very, very protective in a nurturing ability. It will attack a wolf, maybe. It's incredibly rare that these dogs actually even encounter wolves on a physical level, but then it will turn around and count all the members of its family, and that means the herd and the people. These dogs do not think they're sheep. People think, oh, you raise a dog with sheep and the dog's convinced that it's a sheep. No way. Dogs are way, way smarter than that. They know they're not. They also know they're not people. They know that they are working with people and livestock in order to live. So, there's none of this. You're not fooling a dog, making it be something it doesn't already know that it is. You're way behind the evolutionary curve to have that kind of affect on somebody. That's like trying to stop a Labrador retriever from eating cheese on the floor. It's just not happening.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people that are sheep.
Well, yeah, they're sheep for sure,
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at PrepVet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
So let's talk about, I know you said their size and you went there. How much do they weigh and how tall they are? I mean, they're beautiful dogs. For anybody that's listening, you need to go to the Mongolian Bankhar Dog Project website first off, but when you see it in that short movie you have on there at the beginning, it's really great. You guys did a great job on that.
Yeah, I mean, the dogs are beautiful. People that are into dog breeds would say, well, they look a bit like a Tibetan Mastiff. In the beginning of our search for the, I guess, founding stock or bringing these dogs back to the Mongolian people, we worked with Cornell University, in particular Adam Boyko's lab, genetics lab, and we went through, and instead of our using what we thought these dogs should look like or what they were written to be looking like, because if you trust Marco Polo when it says it's the size, he says that dogs are the size of a pony. Well, he said a lot of things that were huge exaggerations. So what we needed to do, and we are all scientists, is we needed to remove ourselves as much as possible from that. And the only way to do that was to get genetic samples. So we worked with Cornell, Adam Boyko, and we got hundreds of samples of these dogs. And we looked at the genetics of these dogs. And we basically came up with the ability, and now it's quite common, to see if any modern dog breed genes are within the population we're looking at. And we only chose dogs that were working dogs. So we would go to a village, find somebody that was either using a dog somewhat correctly or in a few cases using it quite correctly. Still, even though it was quite rare, there were people doing it. So the dog had to be of working stock. And then second, it had to have zero modern breed genetic aspects to it. That's what made our founding population. It was not the color. It was not the size. It was none of that. Our founding population came from working stock with no modern breeds in it. And we basically trusted the very fact that if there was a lot of genetic information in the dogs that we were finding, and it didn't include modern breeds, and that genetic information is the genetic information that was there in 1910. And that was our premise. Since then, Adam has looked very carefully at that, and our samples became part of a much, much bigger study that he was doing, looking for the origin of the domestic dog. In other words, where was the dog first domesticated? And our samples were somewhat instrumental. He would say critical to his study, that showed that the domestication of the dog happened somewhere around the Altai Mountains, which is the mountains of Kazakhstan and Mongolia and the edge of top of Tibet. In other words, somewhere in that area is where the domestic dog started. How does he know that? The Cliff Note version of this is that if you find a population and you look at the genetic variability in that population, let's say that you're looking at black bears in North America, wherever you find the area of the highest genetic variability is most likely where the original population started, and it spread from there. As you get away from the founding area, you lose genetic information because of increased inbreeding as you get away from that.
Yeah.
So the Bankhar, along with one dog that's probably even more genetically diverse than the Bankhar, which is the Central Asian Shepherd, seem to be some of the oldest type of quote-unquote domestic canine in the world. And that comes back to your question of where did they come from? And that seems to be where they have come from. Adam Boyko's work basically says the domestic dog started in the Altai Mountains of Central Asia, and that's where the Bankhar are. The genetic aspect of the Bankhar is incredibly interesting because within the population of the Bankhar, even within just a few individuals, there's more genetic variability than many modern breeds, the entire population put together in just a few individuals.
Wow.
The variability of genes within the Bankhar is huge compared to a quote-unquote breed. And that's probably the saving grace of our dogs. We have two dogs now in our breeding area, and we've met many others that are over 18 years old. These are 120-pound dogs that are, upwards of 28, 30 inches at the shoulder. That's unheard of for a big dog. Now, they are not giant breed dogs whatsoever. They're not built like a Mastiff. They're built much more like some people may know the dogs like Kuvas or Anatolian, Central Asian Shepherd. They're much more like that. Their genetic variability keeps them, genetically tight, which means very, very little comparative health issues to modern breeds.
Yes, so they don't have hip issues like big dogs or anything like that.
We've never really seen it. Now, you have to realize that even today, it's not an easy life whatsoever out there. Once a dog is past 3 years old, it's probably going to be okay. But there is an awful lot of things that happen to dogs out there. We have, with our protocol and being tight and making sure we troubleshoot with the herders, have had, no losses per se of dogs, except we had one dog hit by a mining truck. But, the health issues that we've encountered are incredibly, incredibly low. We recently had one of our older dogs, one of our kind of, I'd say, penultimate dogs, and one of my best friend dogs have a stroke. But he's 17 years old and he seems to have come out of it. So, yes, there doesn't seem to be hip dysplasia. There doesn't seem to be any of these things that, I shouldn't say any of them. It's very low. And if it's out there, they may be weeded out before we get them. But within our breeding of, we've now placed, over 150 dogs, we don't see anything like that.
Yeah, and I was going to get to that. So, I had read their age because they said on average they live 15 to 18 years, which is unheard of for a large dog.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's not incredibly unheard of for a livestock guardian. It's pretty common if you have an Akbash that has come from a working group from Asia. An Akbash is a Turkish livestock guardian dog, big, tall, white, taller and oftentimes bigger than the Bankhar. If they are in Turkey from a working group of people versus in North America where people, just inbreed because they want something. These dogs are living to be routinely 14, 15, 16 years old. And I've actually had several Akbash and so have friends of ours. They're living 14, 15 on average. The Bankhar does seem to be living longer, especially I'm encountering Bankhar that are 18 years old in Mongolia that have never seen a vet, never had a vaccine.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. I'm assuming they probably don't go to the vet, so they don't get anything.
No, they don't get a thing.
Wow.
And then, again, this is where people have to step back and go and make the connection of what does that mean?
Right.
That means that there is selection going on.
Sure.
Because if there was a litter of 10 pups, and that 18-year-old dog is the only one of the 10 pups that made it to year 2 or 3, and it's the only one that bred, and that entire population is getting fortified by the process of on many levels natural selection. Now, you'll get the smart people, saying, well, Mr. Elfstrom is talking about this dog being under natural selection. It's not under natural selection, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's under natural selection as a part of what drives it. The other part is a cultural human co-evolution of selection. And by and large, that is not driven by what a dog needs to look like. It's driven by how the dog does its job.
Yeah, functionality.
Functionality. If the dog can function and do all its job compared to another dog that function and can do all its jobs, but one of them eats less, the one that eats less is the one that's going to make it. So, there are a lot of nuances that are driving this.
Yeah.
And of course, that just retains genetic information because more genetic variability gives more flexibility of the dog within its lifetime physiologically,
Right.
Et cetera. So, it's quite interesting. Phenotypically, the way the dog looks, in other words, the phenotype of the dog is the expression of the genes of the dog.
Sure.
In Mongolia, there really has only been, there's only one kind of selection that is done on the Bankhar. They culturally like the dogs to be dark colored. They like them to have a white spot on their chest, and they like them to have spots over the top of their eyes. And those are really what's going on. But work comes first. So if one happens to be all cream colored and works great, well, that's just fine. But traditionally, the Mongolians often call these dogs four-eyed dogs, and the
Right.
spots over their eyes are the eyes that see into the spirit world.
Right. Oh, that's cool.
So, that has been, you could argue, selected for. And the color has been selected for. And the white spot on the chest is good luck and has what you would call merit in the Buddhist sense. So it's quite interesting to see what's selected for and not selected for. Again, most of it is, can it even live to be, given food when it's an adult? The only other selective force is that routinely in a litter of pups, all the females are killed. It's less so now, but that certainly was the tradition in the past, because the females just ended up having puppies and having more mouths to feed in your family. So, when the dogs are born, the day after they're born, all the females will be put out onto the ice to go to sleep and die. So because of that, I believe, and I have no real evidence besides this anecdotal story to show you that the female Bankhar are significantly smaller than the male Bankhar. The discrepancy between the sizes is bigger than most livestock guardian dogs. And my working theory, which I have zero data for yet, and may never have, is that there has been selection for small females that don't eat a lot. If you're going to keep a female, keep the small one, because it's not going to eat much and you can control it, etc. And what that results in is that you have small females, and the only males you're keeping and letting breed are the big ones. So you have this wedge between sizes over time.
Yeah.
Again, before anybody writes to you or says anything, I have zero data for that. It's purely anecdotal.
Trust me, I say a lot of those things.
What we do have data for is that we decided to get these dogs, breed them, give them free to the herders, and then we have over the years been tracking very closely, very scientifically. We've published a number of papers now, the effectiveness of these dogs. And these dogs are reducing livestock losses by, at the very least, 87%. And we have many, many instances where for years it's been 100%. So they, as we already knew, because this has been supported and it is culturally a quote unquote fact, these dogs do exactly what we were hoping them to do. They stop predators from taking the livestock, as long as you don't have 5,000 goats and one dog, which is too much to ask, right?
Right, of course.
But we have shown that. We have, as you need to as a scientist, we have totally gotten hardcore data to support it. And now we are moving away from that to expand what we're doing in terms of really making this project self-sustaining. And that comes down to teaching the herders how to raise the dogs, gathering herders that have the ability to breed these dogs and trade or sell them to other herders, and teach those other herders how to use them. In other words, we don't want to breed dogs. We never wanted to breed dogs. What we want to do is we want to get this dog back into a situation where it was used effectively. And there are things that are, in our way in terms of that. Clearly, our project and money is the number one thing that's in our way. Getting other people to breed them is also in the way. The fact that these dogs are liked and people want to buy them as pets makes them too expensive for people to use in their nomadic lifestyle. So that's something we want to avoid. And of course, it's the grasslands, what's happening in Mongolia. Climate change, desertification is changing very much the culture of the nomad out there, and that's something that we've been hoping to change as well. That's almost another show on what are the ramifications of this dog in terms of its effectiveness to actually combat the number one problem we came to Mongolia for, which was how do we stop the expansion of the Gobi Desert, i.e. stop desertification, so that you can have an ecosystem that can still retain these rare species and or allow the rare species to grow in population. That's ultimately our goal. Our goal isn't to get dogs out there and protect herds for nomads only. What we hope is the byproduct of that helps the entire penultimate ecosystem, which is retaining grasslands, even in the face of climate change if possible. And that's where our center of focus is now. We've proven they work. We're getting people to breed them. We're hoping that that becomes sustainable. Now, how do we use this dog to help us basically, fix the drastically fast changing environment of the steppes of Mongolia?
So what's interesting, you started this thing, 15 years ago? Was that when it started?
Yeah, 12, 15 years, yep.
Yeah, in 15 years, you had a plan to kind of bring this stuff back. Now is there a trend to them living a more of a nomadic lifestyle now because of that, with these ones that have the dogs?
I don't think you could say because they have the dogs, they are able to live a nomadic lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think you can say that it's made it easier. And the living of the nomadic lifestyle, after 1990, many people left the cities and the agrarian areas and became nomads again, like their grandfathers. So there was a lull or a low point of the number of nomads that then increased. And of course, now with climate change, with a country that is no longer a country that relies on barter system. In other words, there is a capital, economy, a cash economy. Being a nomad is very difficult. So the dog may be helping that, but the world, especially the world of cashmere, is hindering that, and the world of mining in Mongolia is hindering that.
Yeah. But you have all these residual benefits. Again, getting back to the desertization, are the grasses slowly coming back? I know that wasn't your goal, but that's part of it. And also the endangered animals, the predators, is it helping? I'm assuming it is, but I mean, obviously in a small way right now, right?
Right. So we know that our herders and herders in the area around our herders, because our dogs will protect the herd, in a way that it actually protects neighboring herds too. They don't kill by agreement, and even if they're lying to us, they don't need to kill the predators nearly as much. So we can say that. Are we measuring it? No, we're too small.
Right.
We don't have enough money. We'd like to, but we can't measure that. We hope to work with other people, we're working with the UN right now on a very interesting project. So we hope to link with other people, other groups, other NGOs to figure out those things. But we can say that ours are not. And by that, connection, then the actual predators in that area are more numerous. So I think that's something that has to be looked at, and we can't just assume I'm right. That's where the difference between not thinking scientifically and scientifically come in. But we're hoping for that. Secondly, what we are seeing anecdotally, which is quite interesting, is that when the dogs are working with a nomad, three things occur. And one of them is the dog and the livestock, and the other two are the dog and the herder. What we find is if a person herding sheep in Mongolia doesn't have a dog, they tend to have a particular way of herding the sheep, and that is usually by motorcycle. They drive up to the top of a hill or a mountain. Mongolia is very mountainous and rugged and a harsh environment. And they stand up there with binoculars and they watch their herds, and that's kind of how they shepherd their herds. We call them herds. You can call them flocks, but they're called herders there. So that's traditionally, over the last 40, 50 years, how it's done. when we give a dog to a nomad, and that dog at about 1.5 years, 2 years starts to go out with the sheep, and it goes out with the sheep alone based on our protocol because we've asking them to raise them in a particular way. So the dogs go out with the sheep without people. All right, these are not dogs that move the sheep. They're not herders. They just hang out in the middle and they protect the herd.
Right.
When the herder has a dog that does that, the herder then begins to go out with the dog too, because they have huge pride in this dog. And they end up having this companion relationship that we all do with our dogs.
That's cool.
And these herders tell us over and over again that I used to herd in this particular way, but now I'm out there either on a horse with the dog or on foot with the dog. And we ask why, and they basically just say, I love being with my dog.
Well, they're not by themselves anymore either, which is cool.
That's right. They're not by themselves. The dogs will work by themselves. Like the herder will go back for lunch, or it has to, he has to go into town. The dog will stay, a well-raised dog, I will say, will stay with the herd. But what's happening is the presence of a human is a huge deterrent to predators.
Sure.
So by this unforeseen aspect that we're not trying to get herders to go out with the herd. We just want the dog to do it. But the very fact that they do it together is a greater deterrent. So that's huge. Secondly, it's quite common that the herders wouldn't really, they wouldn't check on their herd until maybe once in a day, and then go and make sure that they're coming back at night. Again, this companion aspect, even though the dog may be out with the herd on its own, the shepherd goes out more often, and the dog is out there. When the shepherd goes out there more often, he or she, very common she, moves the herd because they want to move them into better area of pasture. In other words, the healthiest pasture for better food, which means hopefully less overgrazing.
Right.
And so that's the human aspect of how it's affecting grasslands. Again, I have not measured this, so somebody else has got to do it, and I hope it's soon. The dog itself does two very interesting things that we were not ready for, and I noticed this by spending many, many, many hours just observing what the dog does from a distance. It does two very particularly interesting things. And one third one that is that your people will probably love a lot. The first thing it seems to do is that while these dogs don't herd, they're not like border collies or anything. They don't eye a herd because that's all hunting stuff. They do occasionally get up and move before the herd has moved to a new area. The herd knows that that dog is a safe thing to be by. So when the dog goes, there's this kind of very soft, passive, nurturing suggestion to the herd that we should move.
That's cool.
Why does the dog know it needs to move? Well, I think evolutionarily, anything knows that if you stay in one place too long, you become more vulnerable by the minute. So the dog moves the herd, and this is according to our herders, not necessarily just my observation, but again, anecdotal. It moves the herd more often, and that obviously decreases overgrazing. And the dog also, when the herd moves, that dog knows every single individual in the herd, even if it's upwards of 1,000. That dog will go back and find stragglers, and it doesn't push them. It just goes and finds them. It touches noses with them, and it gets them up, and then they walk together. It's kind of like, wake up, buddy. We've all moved on. Sorry to bother you, but let's go.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not a herding in any way, shape, or form. You could never get a Bankhar to move a herd where you wanted it to be. That would be ridiculous. But there's this passive, nurturing herding aspect. So that's really interesting. The second is this care, nurturing aspect that our herders will tell us that the dog comes to them and brings them to a sheep that's sick in a gully that they can't see. So there's the other aspect of care. And the last one is very interesting, and I have a good experience with it, and I would like to study it eventually, is that the dog communicates through a series of different kinds of barks to the herd. The dog has different barks. They mean something different to the herd. There's one bark that says, come to me, and all the herd goes boom, right to the dog and holds tight to them. There's another one that says, run away. The opposite direction is me, because I'm going to go chase something, and you need to go the other way. That one's less tight and less clear, but it does definitely happen. And of course, most of the dog's work is done at night. So there are a number of behavioral aspects of the dog protecting at night. But one of these other barks is that the herd actually follows the dog for a little bit at night, and it's really just kind of a derivative of get around me, but I'm going to be moving. It's very interesting that there's this workingness that these dogs are shepherding in the way that you think about a shepherd walking around passively in the mountains in the Alps, say, with a flock of sheep. They're not moving them anywhere per se. They're just working together, going, okay, maybe it's time we should move. And the herd very much trusts that dog. If they were raised right, if the protocol was followed.
So here's an observation that as I'm listening, I was thinking about something. I find it interesting. I did an episode with the last buffalo, last wild buffalo. They're all in Yellowstone. And they're being, if they stay in Yellowstone, they're fine, but they can only have so many there because the government, blah, blah, blah. But one of the guests I had on was Native American, and they were saying how the government now is studying the culture from back in the Native American days and the buffalo for like fire control and that, the way it used to be done. And now looking at saying, way, maybe the way we're doing things is wrong. And it sounds to me similar to what these dogs are doing, going back to a way that actually is more efficient and works better. I don't know. That's just an observation.
I think so. I mean, of course, the way we're doing things now is our best intent, right?
Right.
We're doing our best. What we need to be doing is looking more closely, and I think we're getting better at this on the scientific level, of the nuances of things that are not clearly, directly measurable. Nuances are very hard to study. So nuances in general are, the smaller and odder they are, the later they're studied, the less they're studied. So, this concept of in your case, the affect of buffalo and people on the actual establishment and continued range size of the prairies before colonial period,
right,
is something that people now are just starting to, I would say, mature enough and get rid of their kind of European egocentrical white man savior syndrome enough to say, these areas were farmed. The prairies are not necessarily a natural zone of a certain size.
Right.
They were farmed, and there was a farming in a passive way of the buffalo in these areas. Burn an area, the grass comes up better, the buffalo come there. Well, the buffalo aren't stupid. Humans think everybody but themselves is stupid. I think that we're slowly, incredibly slowly, coming around to the idea that that's not so. I don't understand why people can love something and not realize that the actual feeling of love is genetic, and we got our genetics from everything else. So if we love, other things do. If we dream, other things do. We're starting to get there. It's very hard, in this purest scientific manner, to look at one variable at a time on something like that. So it's a tough study, which is, in the defense of why we are in many ways narrow-minded. That is a byproduct of the scientific method, which, if we're going to choose one way or the other, I would choose a scientific method and hope that we can mature our method better than going to anecdotal and whatever we think goes, right? If lots of people have lots of ideas that have no founding in fact. The solution is let's get the fact, and then let's think
Exactly.
deeper into the fact to study fact better,
Well, I love what you guys are doing, but the big thing for everybody listening here, for you able to do that, you need money and people to donate to your program. I find what you're doing just fascinating. I mean, we could talk forever. Of course, my voice will be gone in 10 minutes probably, but tell everybody how they can help you financially, from donations to whatever, where they find you. Can you kind of just tell that? Because, for everybody's listening, the life of anybody in a nonprofit world that are doing great things is really the lifeblood is through donations, and it's not generally supplied by the government. So whatever you can put out there, Bruce, please do, and we'll help you guys out.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting when you talk about NGO, non-government organization, or nonprofit like we are, is I think a lot of people don't really understand what's going on. We spend 75% of our time trying to get the money to work for 25% of the time. And that's one thing. Another thing is we spend a lot of that 75% of the time hoping that the people that gave the money the year before will give again. So as a person that wants to help somebody, my suggestion is you give money to an organization that you have firsthand knowledge on, that is small, that is very focused on what it does, and you give a good amount of money, and you pledge that money for at least 5 years. Your bang for the buck will be thousands of percent better, even though you can't have thousands of percent. You're going to get that email, but it's much better than giving, $20 to WWF here and there and etc. So on our level, we're basically composed of about 5 people. We have a budget of about $100,000 a year. That's incredibly hard to raise. And, we spend a huge amount of time trying to be able to get money we know we can get in a year or two after that. So how far your dollar goes with us is much larger. We're a small budget. If we had, my ultimate want is that we have, an amazing company or family that wants to give a good proportion of money, endowment type of thing, that will allow us to still stay within our means and function at the level we're functioning, because we do a very good job. We're very targeted. Even though our vision, goals, and objectives are narrow, that doesn't mean that they're not dynamic. What we do is great. We don't need to get bigger and better. We need to just spend the time to get the data and do the stuff we need. So gifts are huge that way. We can take them on Facebook. If you just look up Mongolian Bankhar Dog Project, our website, bankhar.org, has the ability. You can directly contact me or my guys in Mongolia. Go to Mongolia and come visit, come work with us for a while. Just be ready. It's a tough place. So, my efforts have always been spent in doing things like this with you. I did the TED Talk because I was asked to. I'm a total science and introvert. It scared me half senseless, but I did it because I knew that it would have the weight to move forward. We've had some very, very good journalists. Scientific American did a great article on us that's helped a lot. So every 3-4 years, we get a good boost moving forward.
Well, you're a good speaker. You're so knowledgeable. You've got so much information to give out there. I mean, I spent some time doing the research beforehand, but I learned a bunch today, and I'm sure everybody listening did too.
Well, thank you. And I think that I think the take-home message of that, and it's the same when I listen to somebody that's really knowledgeable on their subject, is that nothing is simple, nothing is straightforward. The web of interconnections is huge. We hope to do what we do well, and then to work with another group to do something else. For instance, we've been working with Wildlife Conservation Society, runs the Bronx Zoo and things like that, on a cashmere project so that we can have sustainable cashmere. Cashmere, if you want to help Mongolia, don't buy the cashmere from anything but a sustainable manner, because the cashmere market has created herders that only have one type of animal and large numbers of them, the Angora goat. So goats overgraze very heavily. Traditionally, Mongolians had 5 different kind of animals that ate the grass at different levels in different ways, and they moved accordingly to avoid overgrazing. Well, now they have all one animal, too many of them, and they don't move as much because they need to sell their cashmere, so they can't get away from the market areas that are set up in their areas. Cashmere is a huge proponent, or sorry, not a proponent, aspect of overgrazing, which is really causing a lot of the parts of desertification. Now, climate change is clearly the other one. Those two together, last year's winter is an example of a climate change episode where an area that gets usually 5-6 centimeters of snow is getting literally meters. Those things are hugely impactful on the lives of the people there.
Well, first off, I'm going to do one last thing. Is this joke thing that I told you about, because we're going to run out of time here. And I got to go lay down.
I think I got COVID just listening to you.
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. I'm embarrassed. Anyway, so each episode, as I've told people before, I tell a joke, and trust me, they're terrible. So everybody listening, please, if you got a joke, I've had children on before telling a joke. Here's my joke of the day. Let's see if you got it, Bruce. Again, remember, these are really, really bad. What kind of dog doesn't bark?
I don't know.
A hush puppy. See what I mean? That's how bad.
That's like a serious dad joke.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And again, anyways, for you guys out there listening, please send me an email at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. I will put on your kids, whoever, to tell their joke. I cringe every time I do it. I know you do too. If you've got a great idea for an episode like this one, send me an email. I'll get back to you. I do it all the time. But more importantly, Bruce, thanks so much for being on. We may have to do another one because there's a lot more that we didn't get to cover. And I know you're on your way to Botswana and doing all that stuff, and taking the time to be on is I really appreciate it. Thank you.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.